Hello everyone and welcome back to the GeekWave. This is the low budget show. It's the show so low it has no budget, and because we have no budget, there is a chance we could get sold off to a big conglomerate. Because let's be real, that's all we do these days, isn't it? Oh man. I'm joking. Kind of. We'll talk about it in the news a little bit. This week's episode's going to be a fun one to discuss because, oh man, why is this happening? Why did we do this? It's all about The Walking Dead this week, which we'll get into, but before that, we do have a couple pieces of news, a lot of big stuff going on that is worth mentioning. And that's the thing. This was kind of a slow news week, but there was a couple of huge pieces that we kind of had to talk about. And that is what we are here to do. Talk about the news. Good stuff all around, but Walking Dead for some reason. Let's talk about that too, but the world of entertainment is always in disarray, always shifting, always moving. Things are in constant motion. Things are happening for all the wrong reasons. Nothing ever goes the way it should. Nothing can just be one thing anymore. So because of that, when a slight thing happens that doesn't work the way it's supposed to, the world suddenly falls apart. Why do I say that? Well, because in the less than the allotted time he was supposed to be the head of Disney, Bob Chapek? I think it's Chapek and the other one's Iger. Well, Chapek, it's the battle of the Bobs pretty much. You got two Bobs bobbing around looking for the time of their lives. Chapek, who replaced Iger when Iger stepped away a few years ago, he's already out. He's done. They're kicking him out. He's stepping down. They're getting rid of the old Chapek. And Iger is going to replace him. This is awesome. I don't know why. This is like both unexpected and expected. Because for starters, he was not really good, was he? You know? Chapek was not really good. He had his head in all the wrong places. He hated animation. He thought it was for children and it doesn't matter. He was very much like, nobody's going to go see a movie in theaters. We'll just put it straight to streaming. He was the guy that was just like, it's all about Disney Plus. Netflix is dominating, and they're really not. If you really look at it, they're not dominating. They just don't have anything else to do. So we have to be Netflix. We have to compete with Netflix. And it's like, you really don't, Bob. You don't. You're Disney. You own Pixar and Mickey Mouse and every princess and Star Wars and Marvel. It's not a competition because you're winning. You won. You are officially in the green. You won. But you were so bad at navigating everything that you butchered the animation studio to the point where Strange World is underperforming at the box office, and that sucks in its own right, but so much is drama behind that crap. So he was nobody's favorite. Sure, it makes sense for Chapek to take over. That, of course, is bound to happen. An old guy who's been at the studio for a long time. It's bound to happen. All those guys just swipperoo all the time, doing whatever they can to get in charge. Whatever it happens, it makes sense. We move past it. But Iger is the boss, dude. Iger was like, what if we just made a bunch of right decisions, bought a bunch of stuff that we need, like Marvel Studios, like Lucasfilm, and he's like, we're going to do it. I'm going to put the right people in charge. Kathleen Kennedy can do her thing over here. She'll keep us on Star Wars for a moment. And then we'll get Kevin Feige doing his thing over here. He'll be in charge of that. I'm going to work on the parks a little bit more, make sure the parks are doing fine. Iger was the genius. He really made that studio flourish. He made Walt Disney a great company. And then you just see, like, Chapek's like, the parks, we need the money from the parks to do something over here. It's like, whoa. The parks should always be separate from the rest of your stuff. If you are having a rainy day, you dip into the parks. That is what it always should be. But your Walt Disney Studios, you should not be having a bad day. You should not be having a rainy day. The parks should be giving you its own millions every month. Everything else should be giving you millions every month. The fact that Chapek needed the other money to do the one thing just shows you he was not good for this. But Iger's back for a little bit. We'll see if he steps away. Somebody else could replace him. I wonder if this was all like a chip for him to be like, well, actually, wanted more money from you guys. So here you go. But he's so high up, I don't think it's about the money. I think he just genuinely cares, and he's like, well, I gotta fix the world now, so here I go, fixing the world again, as he is one to do. Now, on top of that news, there is a unsubstantiated rumor that is spreading from this that sounds insane, but extremely plausible to me, and I kind of joked at it at the beginning of the show. So the current rumor, again, none of this is true. None of this could be, it's all speculation, right? The current rumor is that the heads of Disney could be looking to sell the company and all its assets to Apple. Again, this is a rumor, and it is a scary rumor at that, because it is very plausible. If you think about how big Disney is, sure, they're beating Apple in terms of just like content on a service, but Apple is way bigger than Disney. Think about the amount of money they make just on their product, and not including their sponsorships, their advertisements, all that stuff. Like, that in itself is billions of dollars. They could buy Disney if they wanted to. Now, is it going to happen? I don't know. It wouldn't shock me if it did. If it does happen, the world as we know it for Hollywood is over. That, I think, is the final nail in the coffin. I love Hollywood to death. I love movies and television. But if one mega conglomerate that bought another mega conglomerate gets bought by another mega conglomerate, what are we even doing? What is the point of all of this? Is it just shuffling cards for no reason? Is it just we're doing it because we can and then it doesn't matter? I don't know. This feels so bad. It has nothing good going for it, and I hope that's not true. Again, I don't think it is, but it is somehow a theory that is spreading. Let's pray it's not true. Let's just all take a minute to celebrate Bob Iger returning to the Disney hole, because we might get some better content now, not just endless remakes of stuff you've already seen. We might be getting original movies coming to theaters, which is something they desperately need to do. And I'll talk about it more in my Glass Onion review, but the mid-budget theater movie, the mid-budget movie, going to a theater feels dead. And if Disney was smart, they could have put Disenchanted out there. Just saying. I don't think it would be the biggest film ever, but it could go there, That could have worked there. Hocus Pocus 2. Those could have been movies you play during this month of November and October, build up the hype of the season. Those are things that could have happened, but they just dumped them on streaming. And Strange World, not looking like it's performing well. I'm not going to say that's specifically Chapek, but just going to say it probably isn't because he wanted them to go to theaters. It's probably because he wanted them to just go there. So that's the stuff with Chapek and Iger. All collectively take a minute to appreciate that Bob Iger will be returning to Disney because we need him. He is going to save us. Maybe he will give us something better than the Book of Boba Fett. Which is mediocre. And I guess you could say that Chapek was also like, we can't do Star Wars on movies anymore. That's a whole other thing. But speaking of one major studio doing something, we move over to Legendary. And Legendary, of course, is its own sustained thing. They have done work on the MonsterVerse with Warner Brothers. They have done work with Dune at Warner Brothers. During the whole Warner Brothers Discovery fiasco a couple months ago, Legendary was like, no, we're done with you. Okay, we're going to take our stuff and we're going to head somewhere else. We don't know where yet, but we're going to leave. So they skipped along, went down Hollywood Boulevard for a bit, just looking for a couple of places they could park their keister, and they went to the world of Sony, which is fascinating because I'm like, I would have imagined Universal would have been the ones to pick them up, but I guess Sony is desperate for something good, They have nothing really special. They need a Legendary, to say the least. Now, I'm not sure how that will play into stuff with Godzilla and Kong releasing or Dune Part 2. I just imagine it's kind of like getting A24 on your side in an essence, where you finally got the cachet you need to make something special. Look, I don't hate Sony, but they have made a lot of obvious attempts at stuff that aren't very good. Legendary has a better track record, so if the two of them team up to do something, you could imagine whose influence is going to take over. I'm hoping it's Legendary, but it's probably going to be Sony, so as long as like their future work doesn't get bogged down by the bullshit that is Sony, which I could definitely see happening, but we'll wait and see. I think that's exciting. Again, I think Universal would make more sense since they're like, them and Paramount are making like this huge play to be like the auteur house for some reason. You know, like you see that Universal signed like Jordan Peele and Christopher Nolan, and they got like the Spielberg and Amblin thing going on. Paramount is clearly trying to make bigger franchises, everything with Taylor Sheridan, and they got Tom Cruise over there, so they know what they're doing. Sony might be trying to like fill that position too. It seems like that's what Legendary could do for them, is maybe be like a bigger cachet thing, but we'll wait and see what happens. Honestly, it could be nothing or it could be important. At this point, it sounds like they just want some more name recognition attached to them, so Legendary is going to help them out a bit. Now, jumping from there, we do have a couple of trailers to talk about, starting with the second trailer for the Super Mario Brothers movie. It released at the time of this recording, the day of, and it was cool. I actually have a lot of thoughts on this trailer. I don't think we'll spend too much time talking about it, though, so it all looks great. I'm okay with them pumping every Mario reference in if they have to. Mario Galaxy gets a reference. Mario Kart gets a reference. Super Smash Bros. Gets a reference. Like, I'm fine with them doing that. And then every time a character opens their mouth, I am just taken back by what I'm seeing. So, I mean, Chris Pratt is a whole bag of worms we don't need to get into. He's clearly the wrong fit for the design of the character, and on paper, you understand Charlie Day as Luigi. I get that on paper. Hearing him talk in a more full sentence, it is infuriating and annoying. The one that works is Jack Black as Bowser, because he's almost doing a voice, and that works. We have yet to hear Seth Rogen as Donkey Kong. I imagine he's going to fit that. They showed some stills of Donkey Kong looking more like the classic one from like the Super Mario game, because there was like a shot in the trailer where it looked like he was throwing barrels at Mario, which is kind of cool, but I guess it's kind of lame when they're doing it in an arena. And a lot of the jokes didn't land for me, where it's like, uh-oh, Mario gets hit in the head with something. Uh-oh, a fish kisses him. It's funny because he's with like the strong, powerful princess who's not like any other princess. And he's not good at his job. And I guess they're from like the real world and they're plumbers and crap, but I'm just, it doesn't feel like we know what we're doing to make this original. We're making Mario like this stupid, silly lead guy, and the strong-headed woman is going to be Peach, and I don't want to get into this too much, but I'm going to spend a little second here just talking about the portrayal of Princess Peach. I've said since the announcement, Anya Taylor-Joy clashes with that vision. She is too ethereal, and Peach needs to be like peachy, just pleasant, like a good person you want to talk to. And Anya just does not present that in her voice. She is just too much of herself just shows in the voice. And Peach has like a big head, and I guess that's the aesthetic, but it looks dumb. And it's very clear what they are doing with the character, where we can't just have her be the damsel in distress. She actually has to actively participate in stuff. But the problem I'm feeling with that is how forced it is going to feel, as opposed to making it a good, genuine character beat. It feels like, I'm not like other princesses. I could take care of myself, thank you. And she doesn't have time for Mario's guff. And okay, that's fine, but we're allowed to have like strong female characters, like pine for guys. And I'm not saying Peach has to pine for him. He's pining for her, if anything. But it just lacks that like chemistry in cartoon characters where it just feels fake. And none of the voices clash. Like, when you hear everybody talking, it just sounds so unnatural that those voices are coming from those bodies. But, the animation looks really great. A lot of stuff is going on in it. Like, they go to the Donkey Kong world, I guess. I understand all the worlds being connected in, like, some weird, like, hey, we're in the galaxy world. Hey, we're in the real world. I get that. I'm fine with it, but it just doesn't seem like it's necessary. But I guess they did do that in the games, right? Like, that's kind of what they did. They go to different islands and stuff. So, World 1, World 2, yeah, I guess it makes sense. But the more you think about, like, video game stuff, the less it does make sense for a movie, I guess is what I'm getting at here. All I can say is I'm probably going to be doing a Princess Peach episode at some point, and I do not look forward to this interpretation. Nothing with Daisy or Wario, which makes me think, are you going to make like Wario like the Shadow the Hedgehog of this, where he's going to be like the looming threat for like the third movie? Because let's be real, this is going to be the highest grossing film of the year. It is. 2023, it's going to be the Mario movie. It's going to win. It's not going to be Ant-Man, it's not going to be the Marvels, it's not going to be the other one, Guardians, I think. Not going to be the Flash. It's going to be the Mario movie. And if it's not, then we'll never see another one again. Another one of these, I mean. One other trailer we had to talk about that I couldn't care less about, but I just wanted to throw it in, not only just to fill up time, but just because we should all experience this in our collective lives. That 90s show, yeah, so this is, I guess, not the last, but it's one of the only other shows that has that cult following of a certain generation that didn't have like a reunion or people coming back together. You know, I guess The Office too, but that's more recent. So that 70s show was popular. I never watched it and I never liked it. I don't think Topher Grace is cool, and I don't really care about anybody else involved in the show. So that 90s show, it's focused, I guess, on Red and Kitty. Is that her name? Or Cat or something? You know, Eric's parents, so they have a granddaughter now who lives with them. She's got racially diverse friends. It feels like we had a script already that we could attach to that 70s show to. And I don't care what you do with that. It just feels like How I Met Your Father, where it's like, what is the point? You clearly had something else you wanted to do. And like, I could spend all day talking about how they made How I Met Your Mother as an apology for the Lizzie McGuire show not going through, where they gave her too much money to do that show. Spend all day on that. But the truth is, I really just think Kirkwood and Deborah Jo wanted more money and they wanted steady work. So they're like, hey, this was what made us famous. We don't hate that we're attached to this. Everybody will come back for a cameo eventually. None of this matters. More content. That will just be lost to time. Now, one of my closest friends is a huge fan of that 70s show, and I cannot wait to trash this show with him because I feel like he's going to hate it, and I can't wait to do that. This was the one I hate. I didn't like anybody in it. It just bothered me, and Danny Masterson just sucks ass, so I don't like the show. This one, the trailer didn't have any good jokes, but it's coming out very soon. Just another piece of content to be lost to the bides of time. It's going to be on Netflix, which leads me to believe they're going to drop every episode at once. The only thing people are going to talk about is the cameos from Ashton Kutcher and Mila Kunis, so none of this really matters. We can all move on. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, let's talk about a show that, once again, should have ended before it got to where it did. Okay, folks, we have to talk about this because it's such a weird phenomenon that could only happen at this point in our lives. You know, if this show came out 10 years later, even 5 years later in 2015, I don't think we get to where we are today, because it's fascinating to me that this has existed for as long as it did. And I guess this is going to be less of a retrospective and kind of just more of like, what happened in the time period during this, where it's like, why did this happen? Why did The Walking Dead outlast television itself? Because it did. Look, The Walking Dead, as a show, has pretty much outlasted its use as a thing. You know, do you know what I mean? Where it's like, 2010, AMC is like, okay, we partnered with Robert Kirkman. We're going to be taking his award-winning comic book. We're going to be making it into prestigious television, all of the eras of Breaking Bad and Lost and those kind of shows that are very important. And it's in that era. I guess you could say it's kind of like in the Game of Thrones era too, where it's based off an existing IP that we can stretch out for multiple seasons, get a bunch of good actors in to do work and stuff, and we'll all be satisfied at the end of the day. I guess that's what this essentially was. Isn't that just insane? I find that to be so weird that like that happened with a comic book, because look, it's such a weird thing to say. But the fact that this is based on a comic book almost feels obsolete of the time, because sure, it was in like the beginnings of the MCU era, but nobody was really doing this. Nobody was taking like a Kirkman property or anything. Like we didn't have like The Boys or Preacher or Jupiter's Legacy or any of these books. Invincible, I guess you could say too, because that's another Kirkman one. We didn't have any of those even in the forecast because it seemed so bizarre to even attempt it. And then AMC's like, what if we got Frank Darabont to like do it? And you're like, okay, I guess we could do that. Why not? And he did, and it was good. And you're like, what? Why is that the case? I'm just fascinated by this show's existence. It always baffled me how this show has lasted as long as it did. You know, there's that graph that's been going around for a couple weeks now where it's like, look at the viewership peak here and then steadily decline, increasingly decline. And that's the other thing about this show too. It's kind of like the Simpsons thing where it has been around for so long that the amount of people that will watch it no matter what exceeds the money that goes into it. It's like the opposite of the Netflix thing, where Netflix is like, we have to get this many people to watch it or we can't get a season 2. This show is like, well, at least we have 2 million people watching every episode every week it comes out, so we can get to season 11. And you're like, okay, so if we keep up the number of like 2 to 3 million watching an episode, we can renew it for 2 more seasons, our cast can get a pay bump, everybody will be happy. And you're like, I guess that makes sense. It kind of doesn't, but I can't argue with the results because you have 11 seasons of this show. Again, it's bizarre because nobody is watching it. That is one of my favorite things about The Walking Dead 2 is how it had the cultural touchstone of being the first prestigious television based on a comic book. It had great actors doing iconic roles, making iconic roles for themselves. It had story beats that worked. It had zombies, a concept that is so played out and dry. But they're like, what if we do it every week for 60 minutes? And you're like, I guess that's true. I guess you could do that if you wanted to. And they did. And I'm just like, okay. It's amazing. And they did it. And they did it. But the other thing about the show is that everybody you know stopped watching at some point. You cannot... So I have people in my personal life that I know watch the show. I have friends and family that I've watched the show with. And I remember talking to all of them individually at different points, like, hey, do you still watch The Walking Dead? When did you drop off? And it'd be like, oh, season 5, season 7, season 9. It's like the COVID era. It's like, well, okay. So nobody's really... I don't think anybody has stayed through to the very end. Well, maybe there's been like the brave few, but it's definitely the show that both benefited from the binge when Netflix was still relevant and the idea of what would you do in that situation. And that's the thing I think people don't understand about like this type of format of television. It's like you can see yourself in that world. It's kind of the Lost thing where it's like, well, what would you do on the desert or the deserted island? The Yellow Jackets thing, what would you do to survive in the forest? The Breaking Bad thing, how would you sell meth? You know, like that's the part of this that made The Walking Dead last too, where you can look at these characters, you can pick the one you understand. You're like, well, this is what I would do in that situation. This is how I would connect to it. And because there was like a revolving door of characters appearing and leaving and showing up at any given moment, you could pretty much just do anything at any time with them. And everybody just got their moment. And that was just so fascinating. Just so fascinating. Oh, it's such a bizarre experience. And I don't really understand it. Because here's the thing, again, I know I've been saying this a lot. We can't have this happen again. It can't happen again. There's no part of our cultural existence that would make a show like this work again at this pace. It just couldn't happen. We don't have the patience as a society to do 11 years of this show. We don't have the patience for this type of streaming show to be weekly with the amount of episodes it had. I don't think there was a single season that was less than 12, maybe. The first one I think was 6, but that doesn't count. That's just like a long episode of television or like a movie. It was just like a movie, that first season. And because of that, it's just bizarre that it's outlasted everything. But I'm proud of it. You know, like, as much as I think, like, the show overstayed its welcome, lost its momentum about halfway through, I think you could pinpoint when half the people dropped off was post the Negan era and post Glenn era, where it's like, well, what are we even doing anymore? What are we fighting for if all of these characters are gone? Like that, I think, is when people stopped. And I get that. Because it's like you kind of hit the point where the comic book did. And I know the thing too, like the comic book was running concurrently with the actual like TV show, but it was doing its own thing. And that's another thing that kind of like, I guess, destroys momentum. It's like when Kirkman ends the book in a drastically different way than the actual show does, that kind of like defeats the purpose of what we're doing here. I get it. Again, it makes sense. Just bizarre that these things happen. I don't know, man. Just blown away by television, I guess. The show, I keep going back to how bizarre this is because it doesn't feel right anymore. You know, I was a little lad when this aired. I remember, I think I started on season 2. Season 2. I binged the first season. I think halfway through season 2, I was started to watch it weekly. And I just was like, this is kind of cool. Because again, there was nothing else like it that a young person could watch. Because I'm not going to watch Breaking Bad when I'm 13 years old. I don't have the patience. I'm a dumb little boy. But as I grew up, I guess it just grew more and more and became something cool. And that's what The Walking Dead was. But again, it ends. Nobody talks about it. The show has its fans, but does it have fans? Does it have cultural relevance? It became more of just like, oh, that's still on. They need to end that. To me, that is the detriment of any person who doesn't live in this fear, is when somebody who knows the show is still on goes, oh, they're still making that? That should have ended a long time ago. That sucks. No show should just like end abruptly, but sometimes you got to imagine, like, are we doing anything special here? Are we stalling for time until we either get more money or more audience coming in for a special thing? And I think the case for The Walking Dead was we really just left ourselves vulnerable to whatever the bullshit was of the time. And that's the sad truth. It just kind of collapsed in on itself until it's like we have nothing new to say. So what are we really doing here? What is the point of anything? Are we happy with this? Are we enjoying ourselves? And the question is, nah, we're not. We're just existing. Not really well either. But hey, I get it. Content forever, as they say. And you gotta commend The Walking Dead for sticking through it all. And you gotta commend AMC. Look, it's so funny to me that before Netflix took over the world and we had Amazon and Disney and Apple and Shudder and all these places just come in to dominate the streaming world, it's so bizarre to me that AMC was like the center for this stuff, where it's like they had Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul, they had Preacher, they had Into the Badlands, they had Walking Dead, all these mafia shows, they reran all your favorite movies in the holiday season. Like, they were the place. And you're like, that is so cool. And it's kind of amazing that they were able to do that they were able to maintain that and hold on to that for so long. But then again, the bubble burst, everybody became a streaming service, and there was collateral damage that involved the destruction of The Walking Dead and the AMC format. If we didn't have, and I mean this wholeheartedly, I don't want to take offense to anybody who loves streaming. If we didn't have the Netflix bubble take over the world and a Mandalorian every other day, The Boys every other day, if The Walking Dead just existed on the same level as things like Game of Thrones and Breaking Bad and Lost, just like in that kind of like cultural zeitgeist where everybody's talking about it, maybe you're not watching it, everybody was talking about it, everybody knew what that was, it was cool to have that exist. I think two things would have happened. One, this show would have been phenomenal, would have won awards, would have reached higher echelons than it ever could. And two, would have saved the comic book industry a lot more than people realize, because what is an easier sell to a non-comic book fan than a fucking zombie book? That's an easy sell. That is an easy sell because one, you don't like a character, they might die. You don't have to spend decades of story trying to see if they're going to survive or not. I really think if this book just stuck, if this series just stuck truer to the book, maybe even just like, hey, go down here to like read Robert Kirkman's The Walking Dead comic, I really think it would have like bumped up the comic book industry. But again, I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about all that stuff. Is Kirkman the most successful guys in comic books now? I know for a long time it was like the OG Image Boys. But is it Kirkman? I would say like the modern big three are McFarlane, Kirkman, and Bendis, but I don't know which one. I guess Jeff Johns too, but I don't know. I want to say it's probably Kirkman because this and Invincible was big and Skybound's got its entire industry booming. But then again, Jeff Johns also has all that. He's got like associate producer credits on a bunch of shit. Hard to say. But if we didn't have that big boom kind of in like the post Negan era, yeah, I think the show would be talked about more and be more revered. So let's go through the seasons and kind of like talk about where I think people dropped off. I know where I dropped off. So for the first season is the comic book. Like I think that first episode that aired in 2010. Can you believe that? They have been making this since 2010. That's unbelievable. That first episode is stellar. Like that is just a condensed episode of television. That is a condensed comic book story. It is so vibrant and good. And then you just got like, you know, a couple episodes to lead things together. The family reunites, the ex-husband and blah, blah, blah. It makes sense. Season 2 is at the farm season. That's the one on the farm. Like the first 2 seasons are very condensed. And I think that worked for the benefit of the show where suddenly things are allowed to expand. And maybe for like, if we kept this level, you know, does that make sense? If we kept things at this level, maybe the show would have remained like that popular, but instead it like got too big for its britches. I do think that's a case that could happen with these kind of shows. Then we have the prison season, which is fine because this is when the governor comes in, right? I know people argue over like, oh, who's the best character? Who's the best villain? I think the governor is pretty cool. Negan's the obvious answer, but I think the governor is they did more of him because towards the end of the season, or the end of the show, I should say, Negan had to become something else because guess what? He's a popular character and Jeffrey Dean Morgan was on Supernatural, so an entire audience is going to watch for that. What was season 4? This was, I guess, still prison-y governor shit. Yeah, it was fine. I don't know, like, I guess you kind of start to like stall out as it goes on. So season 4 is, I think, a little more forgettable than the other ones. Season 5 is still not the Negan stuff. It's more Terminus bullshit. And I think you're just like, oh yeah, we really don't have much going for it. But you know what? Making it 5 seasons close to the comic book is impressive. Like that in itself is a feat to do. It's something that is hard to accomplish, and they did a good job making it 5 seasons like that. That's kind of cool. Season 6, things again, they start to pick up a little more heat. You start to realize, oh, I don't know if I need to watch this weekly. That's where it kind of starts, right? And I get that, but season 6 ends with the introduction to Negan. And he shows up, and people are like, oh shit, we're doing the thing from the comic book that people like. And season 7 comes into fruition. We realize he killed Glenn and Abraham, and I guess it like picks up again. You could say like 5 to 6 might be stalling a little bit. 7 it kind of picks up, but then I'm looking right now at like the IMDb reviews, and it drops off heavily. Like the stars are no longer like the top echelons of the show. Season 7, I should say, it looks like it is struggling to maintain viewership. The amount of people that watch the episode looks like it's declining. And you're like, okay, that makes sense. Now, I'm going to look at the graph really quick because I have that propped up for me to check. I want to see when like the actual drop-off is taking place because the seasons 3, 4, and 5 look to be their highest. And season 6, you see a little bit of dip. It picks up again with the finale. Season 7, it picks up again. And 8, it goes down. 9, it goes down. 10, it goes down. 11, it goes down. And it just kind of ends. happens. And you're like, okay, so we know how that happened, you know? Because look, you have two big moments that you can really talk about in the show. Negan being one of them. Like the Negan stuff, yeah, that's good. That makes sense. People would like talking about that. And then when Andrew Lincoln leaves, which is in what season? I don't remember. Does he die before his son? No, does he leave before his son dies? I can't remember. Like, I stopped after the Negan season. When season 7 was my last one. And I would go back and I think I watched the episode when Rick left, and that's when I stopped. Yeah, I stopped when Rick left. I remember watching that being like, I don't really care. Like, Rick was the main character of the book. Why are you letting him go? Is it because we need a reason to pay Norman Reedus an infinite amount of fucking money? Yes. Yes, it is. That is the reason. It's because we're going to pay Daryl Dixon, Norman Reedus, a fuck ton of money. And that, I guess we could talk about that. Like season 9, 10, they're whatever. They're fine. Nobody really cares. Nobody cares, right? I haven't seen the numbers on the finale. I'm not going to imagine they're mind-blowing. But that's the thing. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about the cast for a minute. Because it is so bizarre, this cast. 175 episodes of the show. Only one character appears in every episode of the show. That, of course, is the character that does not exist in the comic book. It is the original character that is based on who gives a fuck. It is Daryl Dixon, Norman Reedus. And here's the thing I find fascinating about all of this. He is such a weird character. Like, I get it. He's kind of like the Sons of Anarchy-ish vibe, right? Where it's like, here's the tough, gruff guy. He's got the crossbow. He's got the bike. He's got like the cool vest on. He's got the dirty hair. He's got like a gruff voice, but he's kind of sexy and he's kind of like a dark, twisted character. But then they just like force every storyline onto him where he has to be the bad guy of the emotional turmoil, and it just stops being interesting and nobody really cares anymore. And I think he went from being like the cool guy to just being like, I'm Daryl Dixon for life. And that's the other thing I cannot get over, is that he's getting a freaking spinoff. I'm like, how much money are they paying Norman Reedus? It's got to be more than we know, because he's getting a spinoff. That is so bizarre to me. I love that. Now, going down on the cast list here, let's talk about a couple people. Melissa McBride as Carol Pelletier? Cool. Great character. Doing something with her that I guess works. I don't think it's that bad. It's just whatever. Lauren Cohen as Maggie. It's, again, probably a fan favorite. It's like, yeah, she's getting a spinoff too. Half of them are getting spinoffs. Christian Serratos as Rosita Espinoza. She was the one that died in the finale. Spoiler alert, if you're watching this, you've either seen the finale or you haven't and you don't care. Rosita's the one that dies because she can't get a spinoff for some reason. That's right, folks. The woman of color is the character that dies, and every other white lead gets the spinoff. Except for Denai, but we'll get there in a minute. Josh McDermott plays Eugene, fun character, I guess. Denai Guerra, she plays Michonne, of course, you know, who I think her popularity boomed because of this show, but I don't think this show made her popular. Because if you were to ask people like Denai Guerra's best work, they'd say, oh, it's Okoye, which she was in, you know, the Black Panther films. But they're like, what? She did 126 episodes of The Walking Dead? I don't think people would remember that. I don't think they would. Seth Gilliam as Gabriel Stokes, again, fine character, is what it is. Andrew Lincoln as Rick Grimes he's the lead, but he's not in every episode, but he's also getting a spinoff, so what is the fucking point of anything? Ross Marquand is Aaron, cool. Chandler Riggs is Carl Grimes, that's great. Jeffrey Dean Morgan, Negan, you know, that famous villain character who becomes like an ally to people, but like a lackluster ally that nobody really trusts him, and you're like, yeah, that's fine. Okay, cool. The Negan stuff, I think, is what bores me, where I'm like, why can't we have like an actual guy be a villain forever? Like, it's not just a problem that any of these things that go forever have, where it's like a character suddenly becomes too popular. We cannot justify having people like a murderer. We have to make them seek redemption or plead guilty for something. It's the Baron Zemo thing. It's the Loki thing. It's the problem that all of these have where we're not allowed to let a character be bad. They have to be complex. But if we just had a guy who's a foil that shows up and does shit, like a Joker of the Walking Dead universe, it's kind of cool, isn't it? Then we have Elena Masterson as Tara Chambler, that's a great name. Kari Payton as Ezekiel. Great wig you got on, bro. Awesome to see you working. Stephen Ewan as Glenn. Awesome. Cooper Andrews as Jerry. Awesome. Sonoqua Martin Green as Sasha Williams. Awesome. And yeah, I don't think anybody else needs to talk about. But that's kind of cool. You know, like John Bernthal was in there for a minute. That's kind of exciting. Chad L. Coleman was in there for a minute. And, what's her name? Lauren Ridloff is in there, too. She was in 56 episodes. Makari's in this show. And I'm sure if you said that to some people, they'd be like, what are you talking about? There's no way she's in that. Dan fucking Fogler's in this show, too. And you're like, what? What is he doing here? And you're like, yeah, he's doing freaking Francis Ford Coppola himself. Dan Fogler's in here. It's so bizarre. But I think what's even more bizarre is how at like the end of this show's life, they're like, spin-off time, baby. Because at the peak of the show, I get doing Fear the Walking Dead. I really do. You get Morgan over there. He's doing his thing. I get that. I understand why you would do that. That makes sense. But when the show's dying, you're like, oh, the anthology series, Tales. And it's like The World Beyond. And then it's like 3 spin-offs, the Maggie and Negan one, the Daryl one, and then the Michonne and the Rick one. You're like, calm the fuck down. Like, who is that for? What are you even implying here? It's such a bizarre thing to happen. I don't like that. Not everything needs to be a universe. You know, we can't just tell like a freaking, like a zombie story. And maybe that's what happened, and that's what bogs this show down to, where it's like, suddenly we're doing too much stuff, and it stops being about, like, zombies. Suddenly it's about politics and society, and you're like, that's fun, but what made people like this was just seeing a group of characters they can rally behind, led by 2 handsome dudes, some pretty ladies, coming together to fight some zombies. And look, I have no problem with the way this show is filmed. It has a really dirty, grungy look to it. The camera work feels both cheap and expensive at the same time, like a real lived-in world, but also kind of just like, what a weird filter we have over everything. I get that because it's aesthetically pleasing to the AMC crowd, but also I'm just like, why does it look so simple? You know, like maybe that's the key to its success, was just not overstating how like artsy it's supposed to be. If we just keep it like matted colors, people are going to remember us for this. It's not going to be stylized like Zombieland or like a George A. Romero piece. We're just going to keep it like this bullshit. Maybe that works. The end of the day, it was an expensive show. Episodes costed a lot of money. The practical effects were next level. Greg Nicotero got to do some amazing work behind the screen, on screen, as a director, as a prosthetics boy. It looks good. And you just have to imagine, like, there is a timeline where this is the most popular show in the world. I think it was for a minute. Again, in that early Game of Thrones era, before the bubble burst and everybody made whatever the fuck they wanted, there was a time where this show changed the world, where this was the thing. Who are you in the zombie apocalypse? Which character do you relate to the most? Who do you want to see die? Who do you want to see live? What would you do with all these zombies at you? What faction would you join? That's the show. And then it just gets too much in on itself. It tries to expand its world too much. Characters start to have plot armor and it doesn't work. And The Walking Dead just loses its momentum. Say what you will about Kirkman. He's not my favorite writer, but he knew how to end that story to make it quietly satisfying. I don't think it was like a mind-blowing ending to the comic book, but it's got its point done. It wasn't 175 issues. It was 92, if I want to say around there. But still, having anything with zombies in it last that long is a feat. It's not something that is easy to do. But we did it here, and The Walking Dead has proven itself to exist in a culture where maybe it doesn't need to. But it did. 11 seasons. There was a finale. The finale was okay. Again, as somebody who only watched the last 2 episodes so he could do this video and get a little bit excited for the spin-offs because I'll probably cover them more extensively, I think they served their purpose fine. There was a resolution. Time was allowed to pass. We were allowed to wrap up storylines. But at the end of the day, it was really just a springboard to get us to a new place. And I hate that feeling, but that's what we did. We can all support content, I guess. But, so close to greatness, you know? That's the thing. But if I had to choose a favorite character, I would probably say Ezekiel's one I liked. Who else do we got here? I'll watch Lauren Ridloff do anything. I don't know if I've seen any major episodes of her in them. I don't really care for Norman Reedus as an actor. I think he just looks good. And he doesn't even look that good. He just looks unique. But people treat him like he's the sexiest thing to ever exist. But this and Boondocks, it's like all he's known for. Let's not act like he's a genius here, you know, in terms of like his acting. But he is getting a spin-off. There is actors attached to it. Angela Kang is the creator of this show. Okay, I like her. That's fun. So much fucking stuff, man. Like, why do you need 3 spin-offs next year? Whatever. Good for him. If he's happy to do it, I'm happy for him. And I guess that's going to do it for our Walking Dead retrospective. Is it a show people like? Probably not. But hey, that's just a show that's going to outlive us all. In infamy or infamy. I don't know. It's just content, and that's what we got. So that is going to do it for this episode of the GeekWave. Now, thank you guys for watching this video. Of course, we could do recommendations, but the recommendation is just to read Walking Dead and watch Walking Dead, you know. That's what we're all about here today. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and if you're listening to this on the podcast feed, please give us a rating over there. As always, you can check me out on Instagram, TikTok, and Hive, and I will catch you in the next one. Have fun. Stay safe. Good luck. Watch out for those walkers. Or don't. I don't give a shit.